Good morning, everybody. This is a live severe weather briefing, and today's briefing is going to focus on the southern Great Lakes severe weather threat. It's a bit of a zonal flow, even a northwesterly flow type of a situation where there is some sufficient wind shear for a tornado threat ahead of an 850 millibar trough axis and a surface low that's going to develop along the leading edge of a nose of a mid and upper level jet streak that is coming in. The nose of that jet streak is going to trigger some low-level pressure falls, and that's going to lead to this cyclonic 850 millibar trough axis. Basically, this line right here, anywhere ahead of this trough axis, is where there is some severe weather potential. It does look like the wind shear is going to be greatest right along this southern row, a few counties in southern lower Michigan. The timing in this morning's high-resolution models is a little bit later with that the arrival of the 850 millibar trough axis. That means that supercells are going to initiate rapidly at around 6 to 7 p.m., probably near and just to the south of the Grand Rapids area. And those dominant supercells could move off to the east-southeast across the southern couple of counties in lower Michigan, maybe into the northern tier of counties in northern Indiana as well. Although the low-level shear is going to be a little bit weaker further south of that surface low across northern Indiana and especially into central Illinois, further southwest of that surface, so you even get more veered out or southwesterly unidirectional flow with height. But the hodographs are definitely favorable for an east-southeasterly mover across far southern Michigan. There are definitely some thermodynamic limitations, though. Dew points are likely going to be a little bit limited. Yesterday's HRRR runs, of course, were overestimating the low-level dew point, as they have for a few years now. You definitely have to temper those a little bit, but there is a lot of cold, dry air aloft, as is usually the case during early April across the Great Lakes, and that's why I think there's going to be very unstable profiles with that dry air just above the ground. That's going to trigger some substantial hail sizes with those dominant supercells. I think that large hail is going to be the main threat, but certainly you can't rule out a tornado or two, especially along that surface low track across far southern Michigan. However, usually in Michigan, there forecasts of severe weather and especially tornadoes often bust, and you have these very cold lake waters here. Lake Michigan is extremely cold right now, and usually anywhere around the lake that eliminates any surface-based instability there, and that often will extend a little bit inland a bit as well, especially when you have westerlies like this. It'll transport that low-level convective inhibition from the lake just a little bit inland. Sometimes, though, that can aid in the development of supercells, where that lake breeze front overlaps with some mesoscale lift or lift along that trough axis ahead of that surface low. That could aid to trigger storms just a little bit earlier, maybe about 6 p.m. there, just to the southeast of the Grand Rapids area, and those are going to track southeast across southern lower Michigan. But again, as I mentioned, there are certainly some forecast bust scenarios for tornadoes. More than likely, anytime you have a forecast of tornadoes in Michigan, they often don't happen. However, this one is a unique setup. There's a lot of cold air aloft. It's early in the season for these types of setups, and usually unique systems have unique results in terms of what they produce with their severe weather. And anytime you get extremely cold air aloft, over top upper 50s dew points, even 60 dew points across the Great Lakes this time of year, that creates an unstable configuration. And with the orientation of this trough axis and the winds being largely westerly, supercells will turn to the east-southeast, and they should have no problem moving off these initiating boundaries here and maintaining a discrete convective mode as they move across southern lower Michigan. And now let's look at the parent setup. We want to start usually in the upper levels of the atmosphere and work our way down toward the surface. This is at 500 millibars, the level of non-divergence. And here you can see this jet streak right here punching into the Great Lakes region. And just on the other side, you have kind of some west-northwesterly mid and upper level flow, and that's going to create these east-southeasterly and even southeasterly storm motions that really could elongate that hodograph, and a tornado threat certainly could materialize. But it is this 500 millibar trough axis right here that is going to trigger some low-level height falls, surface pressure falls. It's going to create an anticyclonic curvature in the 850 millibars just above the ground as well. And ahead of that 850 millibar trough is where those hodographs could become just favorable for maybe an isolated tornado threat. But still, those thermodynamics need to come together. I really think we need at least a 57, 58 dew point with decent surface heating to realize this tornado threat across southern lower Michigan, and that certainly may or may not come through, but we'll break it down here in this extreme weather briefing. But you can see this is more of a zonal flow type of a setup. We've had these setups a little bit throughout the year. They were materializing a bit further south where you have kind of a pool of just enough moisture but a lot of cold air aloft given the Canadian connection of this upper level flow. And that led to a damaging tornado in the Nashville area. Another setup too that didn't materialize because there was a lot of stable air over the Missouri boot heel. These setups certainly do have a lot of bust potential as well, but you do have a nice pool of 50s dew points out here with a lot of cold air aloft, and usually on the northern periphery of that moisture ahead of a zonal flow setup like this. You can get east-southeasterly storm motions, and with those 30 to 40 knot southwesterly 850 winds, that brings just enough storm relative helicity for these storms to produce a brief tornado or two. Now let's look at the 850 millibars. At first glance, not surprisingly, there's not a lot of bright colors on this map, and the reason why is because you don't have one of those big open waves in the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere to trigger a massive 850 millibar jet like what we're going to see toward the April 13th and 14th time frame with that big Colorado low, potentially a bomb cyclone lifting up toward the Great Lakes region. That looks like there could be a pretty substantial severe weather threat this weekend, maybe the later part of the weekend. The timing is definitely still a question. But with this setup, ahead of the nose of that jet streak, you can begin to see an increase in the low-level jet here, just ahead of southwestern lower Michigan. That low-level jet increases as those low-level pressure falls enhance ahead of that jet streak. And as this low-level jet migrates across southwestern or across the southern tier of counties in Michigan, that is when there's a chance that those photographs could elongate and we could develop a tornado threat. Yesterday, I was pulling up some of those soundings, and kinematically, there could even be a strong tornado or two across southern Michigan. The thermodynamics, though, this early setup are definitely going to mitigate that strong tornado threat and maybe an isolated tornado or two. And I'm going to show you why, because many of the models are showing quite a bit of low-level stable air, as you'd expect across the southern Great Lakes during early April. But ahead of that 850 millibar pop at around 0Z, you can begin to see an increase in the 0 to 1 kilometer storm relative helicity. This is just the HRRR model right now, and we're going to break down all of the models. But the HRRR has been pretty consistent with the development of this severe weather event across southern Michigan. And ahead of that 850 millibar trough axis, you begin to see an increase in that 0 to 1 kilometer storm relative helicity, in excess of about 150 to 200 there, and it increases above 250 over these areas at about 7 or 8 p.m. across south central lower Michigan, maybe near Kalamazoo to Battle Creek area, eventually over toward Jackson, Ann Arbor. Around 9 or 10 p.m. that convective line should reach you as well. But it looks like these storms are going to initiate near or just to the southeast of the Grand Rapids area, right where that lake breeze front interacts with this 850 millibar trough axis. And look at how the low-level shear decreases a lot as you go further southwest from the surface low. That's because most of those winds are out of the southwest, and you get more of a straight line hodograph type of a situation. Minimal area between the hodograph curve and the storm motion vector, but a little bit closer to that surface low track here in southern Michigan. This is where those soundings could support an isolated tornado threat. And I'm going to break down those photographs right now. Here's the HRRR forecast photograph from that area that I just circled near Battle Creek or so. And this is a textbook photograph for an east-southeasterly mover to produce tornadoes. You're probably going to have a storm motion of about 30 knots out of the east-southeast, maybe a little bit further south than what is shown here. You've got a lot of, this is the northwesterly flow event part. In the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere, you get more east or west-northwesterly type winds, and that drives the storm motion into this quadrant down here, which really inflates the area between the hodograph curve and that right mover. These right movers and these northwesterly flow events have a lot of cold air aloft, a lot of dry air up there, very steep lapse rates as well. So you get very compact supercells. They're not going to be very HP, I don't believe. I think these are going to be classic supercells, pretty clean updrafts, very discrete updrafts, compact storms, even a little bit low top just a bit as we're in the Great Lakes in early May or early April. But this shows you that the hodograph is quite favorable for a tornado threat. This is what's supporting those 0 to 1 kilometer helicities in excess of 200. Here's the 1 kilometer wind, that low level jet of about 30 knots. Some of the models are showing that increasing above 40 knots as well, which would increase that low level shear even more. And then you've got those 700 millibar winds going back toward almost a due westerly direction at 30 knots. The latest HRRR is trending a little bit weaker with that 850 low, a little bit of a late arrival of that jet streak as compared to yesterday's runs. So I'm definitely not as bullish on the tornado threat as I was looking at the models yesterday. As expected too, the moisture is going to be a little bit lower than what the HRRR model was showing yesterday as well. Here is the forecast, Thermodynamics, in that forecast sounding. And one thing that really stands out with this is this stable air at low levels. Even out ahead of those storms, the HRRR is beginning to pick up on that very shallow, stable air, and the moisture isn't quite what it was forecast to be yesterday. Some of those low to mid 60s dew points were pretty unbelievable for early May, and that's one thing that the HRRR is known for. But look at this little dry air just above the ground. That's acting to steepen these low-level lapse rates between about 2 and 3 kilometers above the ground. You've got a lot of strong westerlies here at about 700 millibars. Strong west-northwesterlies aloft, more than sufficient for supercell storms. And then at the low levels, you've got a low-level jet here of about 20 to 30 knots. It could be a little bit stronger than that. And I think that this little south-southeasterly wind barb is due to this development of a nocturnal inversion pretty quickly due to the dry air just above the ground and that shallow, stable layer there. But that stable layer is quite shallow. So if you do have mesocyclones that are able to continue for an hour or two after sunset, there still is a chance they could develop that tornado threat. But I do think that those storms are going to have a tendency to weaken and become elevated above this quick development of a nocturnal inversion. If you had slightly deeper moisture, then I could think that those supercells would extend after sunset a little bit more, possibly even impact the Detroit area. And I do think that there still is a severe threat in the Detroit area as well. And here are the forecast dew points now by the HRRR. You can see they've come down just a little bit. You've got near 60 dew points. You get some lake modification too that the HRRR picks up on. Some of those higher values there just off the lake, but that's probably a bit superficial. We're really looking at around 60 would be more than sufficient to get a tornado threat. I think we're probably going to be looking more at the upper 50s. You can see some mixing happening here to the southwest of the surface low. A little bit of some pooling of that moisture though along the surface low track in and far southern Michigan, where you could realize a dew point close to 50. I think if we get to 58, 59 out here, that's going to be sufficient to develop surface-based instability and a supercell threat with very large hail. But let's look at the actual surface map. And it's possible, a good chance that the HRRR, even with those 60 to 61, is overdoing moisture just a little bit. Down here in the open warm sector, you got 55 to 57 type dew points. And that's probably what we're going to realize here in southern Michigan. I think if we're about 65 over 56, maybe even upper 60s, that would be more than sufficient to develop a tornado threat. It looks like there is going to be plenty of heating once this dry air and elevated mix layer comes in from the southwest. With north of that warm front, you've got a lot of stratiform clouds, southeasterly winds, temperatures in the upper 40s into the low 50s. But that warm front is lifting off to the north. That should clear out these clouds and clear the way for unimpeded surface heating across southwestern lower Michigan. Still though, looking upstream, you don't see any of those mid to upper 60s type dew points. Down into the Ohio River Valley, you got a couple 60s, a couple right around 60 there. But really, you're going to be talking mid to upper 50s type dew points across southern lower Michigan. And that's going to be the main limiting factor for a more substantial tornado threat. Digging in a little bit deeper on the HRRR, and then we'll assess model consistency between the different models. This is the 11Z run of the HRRR. This is at 0Z. And by this time, the jet streak has definitely overspread southern lower Michigan. Here is the low-level jet just ahead of that 850 millibar trough axis that spreads from central lower Michigan all the way into central Illinois. You get some 30-knot winds there just ahead of that surface low. But really not, you can see that this is a later arrival of that jet streak as compared to yesterday's runs. By 0Z, you already had storms ongoing in south central Michigan according to yesterday's run, so it does seem to be slowing down just a little bit and weakening a bit too. You don't have the 30 to 40 knot 850 winds ahead of this trough like you had yesterday. There is some enhancement of that low-level jet just a little bit, but you're really veering out these winds across northern Indiana as well. Looking at the precip, you get intense supercell storms here. This is the one, these storms up here in southern Michigan do have a chance of producing a few tornado warnings, probably between about 6 and 9 p.m. this evening. These storms here are going to be mainly hailers because those wind profiles become more unidirectional. The left split is going to be favored just as much as the right splits down here, but still you can get very big hail across northern Indiana into northern Illinois with this. It's going to stay to the south of the Chicago area, I believe, especially with the stabilizing effect of the cold waters of Lake Michigan. But really, these storms, Lansing down to Battle Creek, 6 to 9 p.m. are the ones that I'll be watching, and they do eventually make it into the Detroit area, but these storms are likely to be elevated and on a downtrend by this time at about 9 p.m., 10 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And then they finally do move into northwestern Ohio here. A lot of elevated storms too across Ontario. And the HRRR is becoming more realistic with these dew points. There is some arrival of some mid to upper 60s late across the western Ohio River Valley, but it looks like the target area here is going to have dew points in the 50s, which is sufficient for some big hail. But if we can get dew points near 60, then I think that there is a chance of that tornado threat ramping up. Let's look at the 3-kilometer NAM and see what it has for moisture. By 0Z, the 3-kilometer NAM has near 60 dew points, upper 60s there at 0Z. Let's see where it has the progression of the 850 millibar trough axis. And it is also a little bit slower, similar to the HRRR, with that trough axis just moving in to southwestern lower Michigan at 7-8 p.m. Storms will be beginning to initiate here near the lake freeze boundary and the interaction of that 850 trough. And this is at 3Z, so at 10 p.m. you still have a ramp up. The 3-kilometer NAM is definitely showing a ramp up of that low-level jet ahead of that axis. You've even got a 50 knot due westerly, but it is showing the shear profiles to be a bit more veered. But still, if you get an east-southeasterly mover with that low-level jet, as veered as it is, accelerating above 30 to 40 knots, you still get a critical angle of close to 50 degrees with this thing. Slightly better thermodynamics, even at 3Z as indicated by the 3-kilometer NAM. Let's look at the Cape. Look at that Cape. There you can see it. Basically 1,000 to 1,500 streaming into southwestern lower Michigan from the southwest with those dew points in the upper 50s to near 60. They could analyze just a little bit lower than this. And there you start to get the development of those storms near the Grand Rapids area, probably a bit elevated at first, this close to the lake. So it does look like there's going to be severe weather across southern lower Michigan. That's the hot spot, but it's going to be mainly hail. But there'll probably be a few tornado warnings. There's that surface low by about 10 p.m., still just to the west of the Dallas area. So anywhere along and just to the head of this surface low track is where there could be a bit of an enhancement in that severe weather. Some more long-lived, mature supercells. Here is the WRAP model. As the surface low a bit further north. But all models are showing some decent low 0 to 1 kilometer helicity in excess of 200 developing here in south central, southwestern lower Michigan. Or I could see a few tornado warnings. You get a lot of these types of photographs, and that storm motion east-southeasterly or even southeasterly makes a big difference there in terms of the low-level storm relative helicity generated by that photograph. And here's the deeper moisture down into Arkansas. And there is severe weather potential across the Missouri Boot Heel, northeastern Arkansas, western Tennessee, and western Kentucky tomorrow as well. We'll take a look at this one. The 12Z runs are just coming out, so we'll have to inch it back to the 6Z runs. And look at all this deep moisture sitting down here. This is Wednesday, tomorrow afternoon. I do think on the northeastern periphery of this moisture is where the severe weather is going to maximize tomorrow. But the main system in the polar front jet lifts a little bit north of that moisture. This is the system to watch for the weekend as this the wave train slows down a bit. This upper system clears, and then this system gets picked up by the next upper level storm system in the polar front jet, and then it does eject across the southern plains, Dixie Alley. Well, looking at Wednesday, there's not a big low-level jet ahead of this system. The main kinematics lift to the north of the deeper moisture, and the lack of an open wave to the west of it really weakens the low-level jet for tomorrow, but there is a lot of instability. I think there's going to be some big hail producers on the northeast side of that pool of moisture. But boy, the NAM really shows no storms developing with those 70, upper 60s to low 70s dew points down here. Still, though, I do think there's going to be some hailers that will develop on the northeastern periphery of that instability. Now let's take a brief look at the long range. This evening, as severe storms do develop, I do plan to do some live radar breakdowns. This is on Thursday. This is on Friday. Still, the system is just sitting out there in the southwest. But you can see everything slows down. Then you get another system digging off to the south, which could reinforce the flow on the backside of this trough, cause it to dig and intensify even more, and then eventually eject. This is on Saturday. You can see a severe weather threat across East Texas on Saturday. That's a low-level jet in excess of 40 knots there, East Texas into western Louisiana. And there is going to be lee cyclogenesis too. A Colorado low is going to develop, an intense Colorado low. It could even bring a snowstorm into portions of Denver, into the mountains, especially the foothills there. Classic springtime storm. So we'll definitely have to keep an eye on that as well. And look as this system ejects. It looks like on Sunday there's going to be a big time threat across Dixie Alley, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, up into the Ohio River Valley as well. And a big surface low on Sunday. There's the upslope beginning across eastern Colorado. And it does look like the cold pool is a bit deeper in this run of the European, which should bring that enhanced upslope just a little bit further south for this system as well. I could see a snow event Sunday, Monday, even as far south as portions of the Texas Panhandle, northeast New Mexico. Surface low still drops. Last night's Euro was showing like a 970 millibar low up there across the Great Lakes. But this one the bottom doesn't fall out as much in the 0Z run. 12Z Euro yesterday was the big run with this. But it does look like there's going to be a threat Saturday evening across East Texas into Arkansas, and then across Dixie Alley on Sunday with this system. See this new Euro still has quite a bit of upslope flow in the foothills of northern Colorado here, including into Wyoming. Foothills get hammered, not as much further south with that cold pool, that cold front blasting off to the south. Looks like a potential big snow event across the upper peninsula of Michigan, portions of the northern Great Lakes into Ontario on the north side of this big low as it lifts off to the northeast. Let's see if the GFS shows some similar accumulations in the mountains. The GFS really hammers areas to the west of Raton Pass out there, Taos, the mountains of northern New Mexico and far southern Colorado. The GFS, though, also has a lot of upslope impacting portions of the Colorado foothills. And look at the GFS showing this late season snowstorm in the Texas Panhandle. This is last night's GFS. I'm sure it's gone. No, it's still there. And so the GFS shows a decent snowstorm in the Colorado foothills, and Denver could also get several inches of snow from this. And trending a little bit deeper and further south and slower with that system, it does look like northern New Mexico into the Texas Panhandle. Sunday night into Monday could certainly have a severe weather event, and it's going to be on the backside of this main system. The front that drops south behind that Colorado low is going to make it possible for the next system to come in and really ramp up and bend those low-level winds back to the easterly, and that will give you more upslope flow. But we need to get a lot closer to this setup. There's still a lot of discrepancies in the evolution of the upper levels and the low levels. We need to know exactly where that leaf cyclogenesis is going to happen. Still a lot of variables out here, but it is going to be a big system, it appears. The models are certainly trending toward a pretty substantial storm system. And again, going back to today's target area, southern lower Michigan, right along that surface low track. Large hailers are going to be the main threat, but there is I wouldn't be surprised to see a couple tornado warnings around 7, 8, 9 p.m. here in south central lower Michigan to the west of Detroit. But it does look like the slower ejection of this trough is going to reduce that threat of significant severe weather in Detroit, because those storms are likely going to be a bit elevated by the time that they reach that area. Just going to go through and see if any comments here. These live briefings are made possible by our Facebook supporter community. Thank you guys so much for everything. We break down photographs, break down the meteorology of these setups, also live storm chasing when I can. But really just doing these live briefings right now. I'm sitting out these systems, just barreling in to the stay-at-home orders for marginal setups with such big bust potential. I feel like I can have a lot more value to society breaking these down, doing these live briefings, increasing awareness of the severe weather potential in these areas. That big-time system for Dixie Alley, though, on April 14th, or on Sunday, Saturday, Sunday. We'll have to keep a close eye on that. Yeah, some people will call them Colorado lows, and they develop to the east of the Rocky Mountains in eastern Colorado and then eject toward the Great Lakes. Sometimes they'll develop, though, in northeastern New Mexico, move across the Texas Panhandle and lift northeast. Similar phenomenon, though, where you have a trough coming in, you get those low-level pressure falls just to the east of the mountains, and then they eject off to the northeast, bringing severe weather and snow on the backside oftentimes. Eric, the low acts to enhance the wind shear out ahead of it. So the surface low that's tracking across southern lower Michigan, that creates more backed or more southeasterly, in this case, more south-southwesterly low-level winds, which increases the low-level wind shear out ahead of it. Also the lift, the lift in the atmosphere in the vicinity of that surface low track is enhanced in the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere along the leading nose of that jet streak. And Harry, we've done a lot of how to read soundings and photographs on the Facebook supporter community. I do a lot of those types of breakdowns there, and we'll do a lot more of those too. Soundings, photographs, we'll do some plotting of skew T's as well I could show you how to plot those. Thank you, Shelly, of course. Thanks, Edie. Right now, the best place to watch these live videos is through Facebook. This is where I send my live streams when I'm out storm chasing and doing these daily severe weather briefings. So everybody, please stay tuned to those watches and warnings across southern lower Michigan. I'll be going live once the severe weather develops. We'll have a better idea just how robust that tornado threat will be, but it does look like it's going to be mainly large hail type of a situation. But definitely I'll be streaming live on this site. We're also considering rolling out live streaming video in the Radar Omega app. We're still a little bit away from that, but we're doing some testing with live streaming video, and we plan to expand a whole network of storm chasers over there as well. So thank you everybody for tuning in. Stay tuned to those watches and warnings across the southern Great Lakes today. Definitely stay tuned too, because it looks like next weekend into early next week is going to be extremely active as that big time mid-latitude cyclone lifts from the high plains, southern high plains, all the way up toward the Great Lakes. And then another system comes in behind it and causes that post-frontal environment to turn into more of an upslope situation with a potential snowstorm across the foothills and the adjacent high plains from eastern Colorado all the way down to the Texas Panhandle and northeastern New Mexico. So thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your Tuesday, and we're going to be rolling out live radar breakdowns once these storms develop at about 6 or 7 p.m. later on today. Never stop chasing.